Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, and look who's back. It's Ben Gretch. It's been too long.
How we doing?
Been too long, buddy. Tell everybody what you've been up to.
Just writing the Stealing Signals newsletter over on Substack, bengretch.substack.com, doing some podcasting, doing the stuff. But yeah, it has been too long. Miss you guys. It's always fun to come on.
Yes. I was thinking, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but it does seem like since we used to talk regularly, the game has changed quite a bit. And some of it is the ways the NFL's changed. Some of it is the ways fantasy football has changed. So we'll talk about that a little later. We're also going to talk about the dynasty value of Kyler Murray, Bhayshul, Tuten, Bill, and more. But we always start with 3 questions for our guests. And I thought you might have a new answer to this than the one you would have had a few years ago. So strategy-wise, what's the biggest mistake you see people making in fantasy football?
I think what you just said is so true. And so the answer to this question is a little bit like how much time do you have? That's not to sound like I have it all figured out, because I don't think there's big mistakes. I do think it's a market-based game, and I think most edges get found out fairly quickly. And there's a lot of people that take this very seriously. But I do think it changes year to year, and I do think there's these little micro trends that pop up, like you were just kind of alluding to, and it's within the fantasy context. And then I completely agree with your point that within the NFL's context, the sport has been evolving a ton since I was at CBS. Yeah, I mean, that was around the 2019, 2020 time. And about 2021, 2022 is when we started hearing about cover 2 shells and all the quarterback ADOTs falling. And now they're taking away explosive pass plays. And the sport has really evolved a lot in the last half decade as a result. And then the way that people are playing fantasy is evolving as, you know, the world gets more data literate and advanced stats get more ubiquitous in these things. And so I've actually spent a good portion of my offseason already writing about what I call like the themes from the 2025 season and trying to kind of parse them. My biggest answer, I think, right now to this question would be that people evaluate players and statistics as apples to apples sometimes across team contexts that are very different. And I think, again, as we get more like data literate, I think there's a lot of people in the fantasy space that don't want to be like breaking those data rules where you're cherry picking or you're doing these types of things. But one of the things I learned in a data science class like over a decade ago was that when you get to like the really high levels of data science, how there's this thing called data cleaning and how important that is. I was told that like 80% of data science is data cleaning, which is not the sexy stuff, not picking out the fun algorithm to do, which is like 20% of it. And what you think data science is actually a lot, which is the 20% part of it, is the fun part. What it is instead is a lot of, figuring out your data set and really understanding the context of the different things and where there are issues. And I see a lot of stuff in fantasy where people do like cohort analyses where I think they think they're following the right data rules, but really what I think they're actually doing is stripping necessary context out, which is that we have 32 teams. That's not a massive number, but there are significant differences in the ways that the different offenses run and how the different organizations run, how they use different players. And even within, like, if you want to talk about just beyond the team context within positions, like I got in a discussion the other day about, I was commenting on Alec Pierce's free agency deal. And then I had a friend respond about Christian Kirk's deal a few years ago. And I was like, man, Alec Pierce had an ADOT over 20 last year. Christian Kirk's ADOT is so low. They basically play different positions. I mean,
it's like one deal in Alec Pierce. Yes.
Yeah. They're so different in terms of how you would evaluate what's going to be sticky for them year over year, what they bring to the table, how they're actually skilled. So I think this stuff is really, really important that and especially as we go into like AI and all of these things, people want to find the short answers. They want summaries. They want quick hits. And I think the edge, and you asked what's the biggest mistake, the thing that people should do, the mistake is oversimplifying different situations and not contextualizing well enough. And the answer or the edge that's there because of that is to roll your sleeves up more and actually dig into the context in each of those situations.
Excellent answer. And I think that that, like, we always tease Azer about Azer stats and how he can qualify numbers all these different ways. And there is a sense in which, like, some of that is good. We need to be doing some of that. And some of that is just trying to make the answers that we already wanted to be right look right. And finding that balance is extremely important. We have so many advanced stats now and so many sources coming from different places that kind of like say they're saying the same thing, but showing different results. Are there any advanced stats or any other type of analysis that you think is really being overlooked right now?
And that's a great question, especially as it relates to the one that I just gave. I think there are advanced stats that in some cases they're super useful if you understand what they're actually telling you, but in some cases people don't fully understand what the stats are, and so they can misapply in the different individual situations. I like the advanced stats that are a little bit more clean in terms of what they're telling you. It's not like throwing a whole bunch of stuff into a model or something. One of the things that Jacob Gibbs has done a lot of great work on like beyond the box score and stuff is the like the horizontal breaking routes.
Yeah.
And like and that those get targeted a whole lot more. I don't know as much about it as he would, but that's one of the advanced stats that I think I'm not looking at enough right now. Like when I hear this question, that those get targeted at a really high rate, that those intermediate chunk plays in a league that's taking away the explosive downfield throws, that's how you accumulate big receiving yardage numbers these days. You got to be like, that's what Puka Nacua is doing and JSN was doing, and Drake London does in his offense, is if you're getting these 10 to 15 yard horizontal breaking routes, whether that's an out or an in or, you know, those different types of routes, you can earn a lot of targets and you can still pick up chunk plays, even if they're not 30-yard bombs downfield. So I think, you know, some of the stuff that is looking at the different types of routes that the receivers are running is pretty valuable. But I also think, you know, you asked that question about advanced stats. One of the things I think gets overlooked right now, part of my answer here would be like the simple stats.
Yes.
Right? Like
my favorite thing every year is when Ryan Heath puts out his chart showing what stats best correlated to next year's fantasy production. And at the top is always last year's fantasy production. And then all these really basic stats. And occasionally we'll have one or two advanced stats in there.
Yeah, because people will look at, like, I love per route stats.
Right.
All the receiving research, the in-depth receiving research I do, I use targets per route and yards per route as like the foundational element of that, and then add in all the other context with efficiency and ADOT and how many receivers are on the field and all those things that people like to talk about that are important qualifiers for the per route stats. But I use those as foundational stats. I think they're really important. But I also see people use the per route or per play stats, and they just ignore, like, how many routes did the guy run? Right? Like, yeah. How many yards did he actually gain? What were the actual stats? You know, it's not apples to apples. And even at quarterback, I've made this case for a long time. A few years ago, I remember Russell Wilson, I think when he was at Denver, his per attempt numbers were like comparable to Patrick Mahomes as the, you know, Mahomes ADOT was coming down. And I remember there was a big discussion. Yeah. I've used this example a couple times over the last couple of years, but it was like Wilson's playing as well as Mahomes, but Mahomes had like over 100 more dropbacks at that point in the season. Right. And like the amount more per game that means you're dropping back in obvious pass situations against tough pass defenses, that's going to hurt your efficiency. The volume impacts the per play efficiency. People don't realize that. With last year, I was really anti Marvin Mims, whose ADP got way up there. And all he basically did the year prior was run swing routes and deep routes. And then he had like a 2.5 yards per out run. And people are like, he was so good. He was good. But if you want this to be really fantasy relevant, he's got to run way more routes and have production in those horizontal breaking routes, those intermediate routes we were just talking about, in ways that he hadn't done yet. He's got to do stuff he hasn't proven that he's done. You can't take this 2.5 yards per out run and then just add 400 routes to he had ran like 200 routes, and you need like 500 to 600 to be a meaningful player. So a lot of times it's just that basic stuff. It's like, I even on the field, like, is he gaining enough yards? I mean, what? Don't get too bogged down in the per play and the, you know, that those types of advanced stats.
Love it. So I'm trying to check one of my blind spots with this next question. You know, I've spent almost a decade teasing Azer about Daniel Jones, and then Daniel Jones looked like a superstar quarterback for the first 8 weeks of 2025. He's back in Indianapolis on a 2-year deal. Do you buy the Colts offense and Jones specifically that we saw in the first half of last year?
To an extent, yeah. I think, and mostly because I do think right now the different coaches and schemes matter a lot in the NFL as defenses have gotten a lot more difficult to figure out. We're just talking about like the cover 2 shells, and there's a lot of this like pre-snap, post-snap rotational stuff that defenses are doing. They do the split safety things where they, it used to be, hey, we're lining up and running a cover 2, and the quarterback could identify that pre-snap, and they had a cover 2 play to go up against. And now it's, they're running cover 2 on half the field and cover 4 on the other half, and it switches based on like if a motion receiver switches, it will flip which side. And teams on the sideline can't even figure out what the defense was running in the pictures like mid-game when they're trying to analyze what to do the next time. It complicates things. And so I think with defenses being more direct in what they want to do, as opposed to just lining up and letting the offense sort of respond to their coverages, they're being more, hey, we want to impose our will in terms of, being more multiple and those types of things defensively.
That was kind of the angle I was going was the NFL got to see that for about 8 games before everything kind of fell apart. And some of that was Jones was injured before he was injured. And so we don't really know how relevant that is. But also within what you were talking about in this cat and mouse game between the offense and the defense, we've seen some offensive philosophies have a lot of success over a half a season or a full season. And then we get to the next year and, we're going to have to change things because they figured that happened with Mike McDaniel a little bit. He's had to change things a couple times. And so I didn't see things that they were scheming fantastic. Yeah. But it almost looked too easy. And it's like, well, the league's not going to let you keep doing that.
That's true. And that's a great point. That's where the to an extent, thing is, because that was where my question was with Sam Darnold all the way through him winning the Super Bowl. I mean, this guy led the league in giveaways this year and people want to crown him. And he led the league in giveaways on a team that was constantly playing from ahead and still had a massive negative PROE. Right. They were running the ball in even more than expected in highly expected run situations. They clearly were not saying, we want you to drop back and win the game, which is that goes back to that Mahomes versus Russell Wilson comp I had a few years ago. There's coaches that hide their quarterbacks, but in a league where the defenses are ahead right now, because there is that cat and mouse, you can win a Super Bowl hiding your quarterback. I mean, it used to be that like you're giving up possessions, right? But now it's if you punt and play great defense. I mean, and that's what the Seahawks just did in my mind. I do think Sam Darnold played great in the postseason and played very well at the right time. And I do think because they run so heavily, they put him in great situations off the run and off the play action and those things. And then when you have a receiver as good as JSN at creating separation, and then the gravity that, he created other guys getting open and all of that stuff. And I think the Colts situation's a little a smaller version of that. To your question, I think we could ask that question about a lot of teams, I guess. Right. I don't know what the Seahawks are going to look like next year without Clint Kubiak, and they won the Super Bowl. Right. So I have those concerns. I would consider myself a fan of Shane Steichen for having the answers to these types of questions. One of the things about him that stuck out to me this year that I'm probably putting too much weight on, but there was this weird loophole rule that kind of took over where when there was a personal foul on a touchdown or an extra point that carried over to a kickoff, people probably saw this. Teams started kicking the ball out of bounds intentionally, right? Because instead of the ball going to the 40, because of the loophole rule, the 15-yard penalty would carry over even after the kickoff to the starting field position after the kickoff penalty of kicking it out of bounds. So they'd go back to the 25, and from the 40, that 15 yards would apply. And with the new kickoff rules, the average start was like beyond the 30. So teams were intentionally kicking out of bounds to put it to 25 and taking that as a win. The first team that did that was the Colts, and when they did it during the game, the broadcast booth was like extremely confused about what was happening. And Steichen was clearly the guy on top of the situation. It's very demonstrative. They were showing him on the broadcast. He's talking to the referees. He's talking to his kicker. It wasn't just like the special teams coordinator figured this out. It was clear that he was very involved in this and knew the rule. And then it became one of those copycat things and everyone was doing it by the end of the year. But my point is just that's an example of a coach who what I think you have to find new answers for new problems as the defenses start adjusting as they will, like you said, is to be very detail-oriented in all of those things. That, to me, was a coach that's very prepared, right? going into game day and those things. I see things like that from Steichen that I feel very good about. Just the fact that they were able to be as effective as they were for the first half of last year is a positive. I do think it's hard to maintain that for the reasons that you said year over year. But I guess I'm pretty optimistic, even though I'm with you. I'm still skeptical of Daniel Jones. I don't fully buy into Daniel Jones.
Well, and I think like we'll take our first break, but I think that's kind of like it also goes back to the whole Alec Pierce thing. And like, yeah, now he's averaged over 20 yards per catch 2 years in a row. Do we actually believe that he's just the first guy who's figured out how to do this year over year, or that Steichen's figured out how to do it? And so plenty of mystery still surrounding the Colts. Let's take our first break and we'll get into a guy who there's all kinds of mystery about, Kyler Murray.
This is why we do this every March.
Major slam!
It is a basketball party.
It's March! Expect the unexpected!
So Kyler Murray is on the Vikings now. We've kind of thought this was going to happen for 4 or 5 days. It made by far the most sense for them because they get a vet minimum quarterback who could be their best quarterback. And I guess let's start there. Do you think this is a like wide open competition that Kyler probably wins? No,
I don't think it's wide open. I think Kyler's already won it from the moment he signed.
Even more encouraging from the Kyler Murray standpoint, because I just let's stick with him for a minute. And we had a JJ McCarthy question we'll get to. Also, I've left a little time at the end of the show for your chat questions. We probably won't have a lot of time for them because Ben and I like to talk. But Kyler Murray, I think when people look at the match between him and O'Connell, it's like, yeah, there's a lot. You mentioned those end-breaking routes. There's a lot of over-the-middle stuff that they've liked to do in Minnesota. That's pretty much been the worst thing that for Kyler Murray in terms of playing on schedule and making those throws over the middle. So should we expect something completely new from Minnesota because we respect the coach and think he finds solutions kind of like Steichen? Or are they going to just turn Kyler into a new quarterback like they did with Sam Darnold?
I think you're asking all the right questions. I don't know what to do, like what to think here. I think one of the interesting things about last year was that Josh Allen led the league in rushing yards, and he was below 600 yards. He was the lowest QB rushing yard leader since 2009, since David Garrard in 2009. Just a few years ago in 2022, we had three, I think, over 700 yards. In 2024, both Lamar Jackson and Jane Daniels were right around 800 yards. Obviously, both those guys got hurt, and that was part of this stat. But you saw guys like Kyler. Kyler gets hurt early, but basically got replaced by Jacoby Brissett because they were like, we don't really need to rush him back. There was a lot of confusion about how healthy he was or not healthy. But I think they just wanted to go forward with Brissett from the perspective that for the quarterback position on a league-wide level has become more about the like processing. This with the rotations in the secondary I was talking about, the post-snap processing is so important. That was more like Brissett's skill set. That's what, I mean, that guy's never been a super great athlete where coming up, he makes the NFL because in high school and in college, he's able to process and deliver the ball. Whereas when you're Kyler Murray has one of the most efficient seasons in college football history, but also part of that is when you have answers with your legs and with your arm, you can kind of do a little of both. And so it's tricky. We saw Justin Fields really crash out last year. We saw players like Jalen Hurts, who had every year of his career had at least, I think it was 600 rushing yards or 500 rushing yards and double-digit rushing TDs. He fell to, I think it was 600 every year of his career as a starter, and it fell to like 450 rushing yards and like 8 rushing TDs. Even players with established kind of rushing baselines, we saw the drop-off. And I think Daniel Jones is a guy who was one of the 700-yard rushers a few years back when he was in the Giants offense. He ran for like 150 yards in this Colts offense last year. It's completely different. And so I do have a question of what defenses are doing differently and started to do differently in 2025 with their fronts. I've seen some stuff that suggests that they've had different answers for like the ways that the like protections get shifted and stuff at the line. And I think they're navigating some of the QB mobility stuff better, which is a problem for a quarterback like Kyler when you rely on that mobility, especially because the height question is so important. It's a legitimate question. Can he even like see over the middle of the field when he's in the pocket? I still don't know. I mean, look at Trey McBride, who in the red zone where it gets clogged up, didn't catch any touchdowns with him forever. And then Jacoby Brissett takes over. And in less than a full season, Trey McBride has an 11 touchdown season, is one of only 2 tight ends over 10 TDs. Like that is what I would have expected from Trey McBride his whole career.
I will say, I think, and we had some questions about what this does for Justin Jefferson. I think it unquestionably at least gives you more hope. But if you wanted to just design an offense around Kyler and just let him run around a little bit more and just throw the ball a little bit, maybe just let's take some more sideline shots. You got some pretty good wide receivers to do that. And Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, like those guys are very capable.
And when we thought Kyler was very good, it was when he had DeAndre Hopkins and when he had the receiver position as more of a strength. The stuff with Marvin Harrison the last couple years, weird. But the big thing on Kyler, he only played 5 games last year. Right. I don't think people necessarily realize how little he played before he got hurt and then basically was still hurt / benched. I mean, it was a quick flip in terms of Arizona moving forward with Brissett for the rest of the year. I don't know that we can really draw a lot from last season, and the situation hasn't been great with Arizona. That relationship's been breaking down for a few years. I do have a lot of faith in Kevin O'Connell as well. My answer for why the Vikings were so bad last year is more that JJ McCarthy is just probably that bad.
Right.
I like my skepticism for Sam Darnold is more, even though this guy's won 14 games in 2 offenses the last couple of years, is that I think it's not really Occam's razor, but I think he was in 2 great situations 2 years in a row, which is a more convoluted answer, but a possible answer for how this guy has been able to win 14 games in 2 different situations and still be a pretty mediocre quarterback by my mind. And I think that's Kevin O'Connell's really good. And as you said, the receivers are really good. So it's the perfect situation for Kyler to go play. I have some skepticism, as I was saying, but I'm with you. I'm optimistic. I mean, this is an upgrade from what they have.
I think it's really difficult, and you're probably I don't think you enjoy these types of questions quite as much, but we're going to go some rapid fire because it's really difficult to rank Kyler, especially in Dynasty, right? Like in redraft, you can kind of say, you know what? He has immense upside. He has great wide receivers. We'll take a shot on him late. And if it doesn't work out, who cares? In Dynasty, it does matter a little bit more. So let's just go through some rapid fire. Would you rather Kyler Murray or Tyler Shuck on your Dynasty roster?
Kyler Murray. I think Shuck's not very good.
Kyler Murray or Malik Willis?
Kyler Murray.
Kyler Murray or Cam Ward?
In Dynasty, I think I would take Ward, even though I didn't love his rookie season, but I think he still have the age stuff and more long-term upside.
Kyler Murray or Bryce Young?
Kyler Murray.
Okay. So that's a little bit, I actually haven't updated my rankings for March yet, and really struggling with where to place Kyler amongst the QB2s, but I think that kind of puts him in the mid-teens.
I would say that I'm probably less bullish than that implied, but I'm not very high on Shuck or Bryce Young as long-term players. Less so than I think the market.
Good quarterbacks. So
yeah, right.
So we have here. Jake says that he offered 303 for JJ McCarthy as a joke at noon yesterday. Once Kyler signed, JJ McCarthy's manager accepted that trade.
I don't think I would take it.
What's that? You'd take?
I'd take the 303. I think.
I think we generally kind of assume when people don't say here that they're playing in a dynasty league, they're playing in a super flex league. And so I think if you can get JJ McCarthy for a 3rd round pick in a super flex dynasty league, it's worth it. Kyler could be a disaster. McCarthy could improve. One of the things I think you've told me before is like, we have to be willing to accept that things that we don't expect to happen are going to happen. And so getting a guy who's in some sort of a QB battle for a 3rd round pick is probably better than you're normally going to do.
The reason I have such a hard time with it is Justin Jefferson, each of the first 5 years of his career, had a yards per out run of 2.5 or better. And last year he ran 550 routes and his yards per out run was way down at 1.88. His yards per target, 7.5. It had been like 10 plus by PFF numbers every year of his career. If you can't get the ball to Justin Jefferson and like he's like the premium efficiency receiver and be efficient throwing to him, it just scares me. But you're right, he's a rookie. We have to be open to uncertain things.
Going to be a 3rd-year QB now. He's young though. I should have asked this one, so thank you, Saigon. Kyler Murray or Daniel Jones?
I think I'm gonna take Kyler Murray again. Yeah.
And I would have much rather if I was the Colts brought Kyler Murray in on a 1-year minimum deal than pay $88 million to Daniel Jones. Chris Rodriguez went to Jacksonville, and there is a segment of the fantasy football community that could not be more excited about hyping Bhayshul Tuten now. And so my first question, I don't know which side of this you're actually on, but my first question is, why is it more of a certainty that Chris Rodriguez won't be liked more by his coach than Chris Rodriguez after the same thing just happened with Bill?
And I don't think that's a certainty at all. Chris Rodriguez played under Liam Cohen at Kentucky, which has been, making the rounds as a tie-in here. I think the optimism, it's not hard to get optimistic about Tuten when you look at the prospect profile. The optimism comes from what the ceiling could be if he's the guy. This goes into that uncertainty point we were just talking about. Chris Rodriguez, basically no receiving profile, not a lot of like explosive runs. He is an efficient runner. He's a good physical downhill runner. And gets what's there and more. I like Chris Rodriguez as a runner, but when you have that combination for fantasy ceiling where you don't have a high rate of like 15 plus yard runs and you also don't catch passes, like basically none. He has single digit receptions in his career so far. I think he'll catch more because Liam Cohen's offense is throw to the backs a lot. I think he's going to play enough that he's going to catch some balls. But Tuten has a little bit of a receiving profile. Tuten's relative athletic score, the RAS number was 9.55 coming out. His 40 time, his 10-yard split, all that stuff was like 9.99 out of 10. It's so elite. His vert and broad jumps that show explosiveness off the charts, like elite metrics for running back explosiveness. And he's undersized, but he still has this 9.55 out of 10 despite a composite size grade of poor because he's a smaller back. You have that, and then you have the advanced metrics like the evasion rate numbers. Missed tackle force numbers are off the charts in college. And what we saw last year was that he got some short yardage stuff. His success rate was actually good. ETN was the far better rusher last year, but interestingly, by success rate, Tuten's was 47%, ETN's was 36%. Mm-hmm. In the same offense, Tuten's was meaningfully better as far as and that's what Chris Rodriguez does really well, is a lot of the success rate stuff. But Tuten's explosiveness, I think people think about size with this like grinder success rate style. And I don't think people realize how important that first step quickness is for like that. We think about yards before contact as an offensive line stat, but running backs who hit holes hard tend to have higher yards before contact because they're just explosive enough. Jahmyr Gibbs tends to have great yards before contact and yards, after contact, explosive play rate because he's just an elite player. But a big part of that for him is when something's blocked up, he's going to hit it, whereas some other backs might take a little longer and then they get contacted a little earlier as a result. It's not just the blocking for stats like that. And that's what Tuten has, that 10-yard split and those jump numbers. And so it's easy to get really optimistic about Tuten and think on, if this breaks his way, what his fantasy ceiling could be.
Right. No, yeah, I think that the receiving is going to be key because he does have a decent receiving profile. He also there's some questions about his hands, both in terms of catching and holding onto the ball. Matt Waldman talked about that a lot when he was on in April last year. And LaQuint Allen exists. And I have this fear, because Allen pretty much dominated third downs last year. Is there a risk that Tuten just turns into this super explosive trap back with Chris Rodriguez taking short yardage work and Allen taking most of the passing downs work?
I think there's a risk. Absolutely. I think it's a fair question. Tuten did have the short yardage work over ETN last year and was good at it, again, with the success rate stuff. So I guess I think they'll probably split it to some degree, but I do think Rodriguez could take that. The receiving stuff that's interesting as well is the little Quinn Allen thing. He's clearly a good protector and they like him and they're going to play him on pass downs. But in terms of him doing more, he ran 146 routes last year and ended up with a 0.37 yards per route.
They don't want to give him the ball.
Yeah. So it's not, I don't think that's going to expand from that side for him.
Right. No,
he had such a tough
he might
year.
take 20 to 25% of the snaps. And if that's the case, then Tuten kind of has to make Chris Rodriguez irrelevant, because if there's two guys taking 25% of the snaps, it gets really difficult. So that will be, hopefully Tuten just gets better at pass protection, and he's so much better with the ball in his hands. They just want him on the field more. Let's just do a couple of real quick on Tuten. Bhayshul Tuten in Dynasty or Kyle Monangai?
Tuten. Way better, like, long-term prospect upside in my mind.
Right. Tuten or Blake Corum?
Tuten.
Here's an interesting one because he's not actually that old, but he is hurt. Tuten or Zach Charbonnet?
Tuten.
Okay.
Coming off an ACL. I got to take the just turned 23-year-old with the explosiveness, potential lead back over a guy coming off an ACL.
And I have Tuten over all those guys. The reason I asked guys below him is because for me, everybody above him is like 3 years older and maybe a borderline top 12 running back next year. So, or they're like, I think I'm still taking Bucky over Bhayshul Tuten. So
I will say that Tuten's a really interesting dynasty asset from the perspective that he could be a total zero a year from now. Honestly, like he could, if he has a really tough second year and doesn't beat out Chris Rodriguez and those things, it could be nothing. He was a day 3 pick. Like these kinds of running backs can wash out, but he is more athletic than a lot of the ones that do tend to wash out. And there are a lot of really positives in his prospect profile. He's a big swing. If I'm a contender, if I'm a rebuilder, I'm taking him over probably some of those veterans you mentioned. If I'm a competing dynasty team right now, I might be more inclined to take more of a sure thing because there's wide error bars with Bhayshul Tuten right now.
Right. Well, and I think I don't know how much you've looked at the rookies yet, but we've kind of talked on this show about how there's 5 players everybody really wants. And then there might be 3 more that somebody wants. So 106 or Tuten.
What's that?
106 this year or Tuten.
Oh,
I
haven't looked at the rookies enough. I think, I mean, just kind of based on what you're saying, I've been doing a lot more work with veterans so far this offseason. I take kind of a different approach.
I think the 106 through the 108 is the sweet spot because I think everybody's going to take him over 109 and everybody's going to take 105 or better over Tuten. So it's somewhere in that 106 to 108 range. And probably what's going to happen is once we get draft capital, there's going to be a pretty clear 6th and 7th, I think, that we like over Tuten because we'll talk ourselves into some guys that right now we aren't sure if they are very good.
But I think you're right. That's what I was when I didn't have a clear answer for that. I think that's right where,
So last one, and we'll transition to the next player we're going to talk about. Tuten or Bill?
I'm taking Tuten.
You're taking Tuten. So Jacory Croskey-Merritt is another guy in a different way than Bhayshul Tuten, but another guy who, like, man, when he has the ball, and Cliff Kingsbury already said this last year, like, we love him on the field when we're going to give him the ball. It's all the rest of the time that we don't really. They brought in Rachaad White, which I've seen pushed as both a really bad thing for Jacory Croskey-Merritt and a great thing because now they're hopefully not taking Jeremiah Love and Bill's a better rusher. How do you evaluate Jacory Croskey-Merritt and Rachaad White?
Well, I'm interested in the Jeremiah Love side of it as well because White only got a 1-year deal by what I saw, and we didn't get details yet. Rodriguez got 2 years, and the Jags aren't necessarily in position to get Love anyway. But Rodriguez got a little bit more even than White, which is interesting. And then the other thing about like the Tuten and Jacory Croskey-Merritt, comparison is JCM Bill was a 7th rounder last year. Tuten was I think was the 2nd pick of the 4th round, 2nd pick of day 3, one of the very first picks of the 4th round. So a very different type of day 3 back. Tuten was very close. Yeah. Just same bucket. So I do think that the White signing doesn't preclude them from drafting Love is the first thing that I would think. I also doubt that a lot of people realize that Bill had 800 rushing yards and 8 rushing TDs last year, and only 11 other running backs in the NFL had 800 rushing yards and 8 rushing TDs. I mean, that's one of those Azer stats because that's exactly what he hit. And like Bijan Robinson didn't even do that because he only had 7 rushing TDs, but he had receiving TDs. So it's a little bit unfair of a stat, but there's not a ton of guys that run for 800 yards and 8 TDs every year. It's not like he had the worst rookie season of all time. There's a contingent of people that think Bill is like just completely terrible and completely dust. And I don't understand that perspective on a 7th rounder who got work and had some pretty good efficiency numbers, had some long touchdowns, some of that stuff. As you mentioned, they like some things from him. And then there's a lot of other things that they're concerned about. White to me is like the exact type of back that is both probably good for Bill and also concerning from the perspective that he's good from the perspective that White is one of those backs that has really slow first step. It's like he's in cement shoes when he's starting in the backfield. And so when it comes to like some of the burst stuff and being able to hit holes hard. And I mean, White struggles with that, and he's always struggled with the efficiency metrics as a rusher. And yet White is competent at everything. He's a very good pass protector. He's a good receiver.
He's the exact opposite of Bill.
Exact opposite of Bill. And if you get him into space, I do think he's got good enough long speed that he makes some plays. They get him in. When Liam Cohen was in Tampa a couple of years ago, White, even in Bucky Irving's breakout year, White tied for the running back lead in receiving TDs with 6 because they were able to get him into some space on some swings, and then he goes to the house on some of those. I mean, he's able to get moving. He's a big guy. When he gets downhill, it works for him. And one of the things that I like about his fit here is it's not just Bill. It's not just Chris Rodriguez. It was Jeremy McNichols at times. It was Austin Eckler the year before. This offense, well, some of it I think was Cliff Kingsbury, so it'll be interesting to see. But this offense, and then Jaden Daniels' threat to pull the ball and run. We know how mobile quarterbacks can lead to rushing efficiency for the running backs. Has allowed like a handful of different backs in this offense to get some big runs, to get into some space, to average 4.5 plus yards per carry. If Rachaad White is this slow on his first step, but defensive ends can't crash down onto him because they're afraid of Jaden Daniels, maybe we get some decent runs out of him. So if Bill can't be consistent enough, Rachaad White's the type of consistent back that will just do, first rule, make no mistakes, do no evil type of a thing. Some teams just want that type of back, and they'll play him because he's a veteran that can pass protect and catch the ball and at least get the yards to a certain degree that are blocked. However, if Bill is able to take a step forward and continues to be an explosive back, I don't think White can keep him off the field because White can't be anywhere near as explosive. It'll be a little bit like Bucky and Rachaad White 2 years ago. So I think it's both good for Bill and bad, I guess is the way that I'd put it. The real fly in the ointment is I really do think they may still land with Love.
Yeah, I'm still expecting the Giants are going to take him, but we'll see if that happens, if that ends up being true. I think you made a good point in there in that, like, the biggest piece of these two equations with Tuten and Bill is how much are they going to develop in the next few months, or have they already developed in terms of improving the things that were keeping them from being on the field more. And so whichever one of those guys does a better job at that is probably the answer to which one you'd like to have in Dynasty. Is there anybody that hasn't signed yet that's going to matter for fantasy football in 2026?
I was looking at the free agent, like available free agent list earlier. Tyreek Hill, his health will be interesting to track. He was still really good on a per out basis before the massive knee injury. So, we'll learn in terms of when he signs and what happens, but he could certainly be someone to pay attention to. David Njoku, I think very much could at the tight end position. He hasn't signed yet, right? I haven't checked this morning. And then from there, there's some receivers. Like I wrote in my little notes that Jawan Jennings maybe, but I'm not super optimistic. His per out profile looked a lot worse. It looked like his pre-2024 breakout per out profile, which 2024 suddenly Jawan Jennings came out of nowhere to be something different. And then 2025, he looked like the pre-2024 guy, and now he's not going to be in the Kyle Shanahan offense. So I'm probably not a huge believer there.
I don't know how much of that was because, he negotiated those per game bonuses and participation bonuses, and he was playing through all kinds of things last year to try to get extra dollars. And so I don't know how healthy he was.
Right. And I do think there's something to be said about what he did in 2024, the actual breakout. So there's potential there. And then, some of the veterans, you still have like Stephon Diggs and Christian Kirk and Debo. I think those guys are all probably on the downswing, and it doesn't surprise me they haven't signed yet. There's not a lot left out there. Is there anybody you're seeing?
No. I think like maybe one of the old wide receivers, but they got to find the perfect spot. And I think generally speaking, and the longer they go without signing, the less I'm going to believe that anybody believes they're still a difference maker. I guess the one guy that it's kind of that weird situation, Dallas Goedert, they just keep pushing back the date of when they have to make a decision on him, which kind of seems like they're trying to get something done there. But if he became a free agent, he could go somewhere and make a difference.
Oh yeah.
But we're going to talk more about tight ends in just a minute, because it might be harder to make a difference at tight end than it used to be. Let's take our second break.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ hits every highlight from all the sports that matter to you.
JJ, we appreciate your time breaking it down.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With the plays you missed.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And analysis to give you an edge.
All we need is 20 points.
I was shaking in my boots.
Texas, Ohio State, who wins this game?
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, streaming free 24/7.
We are back, and we talked about at the very beginning of the show that there's lots of things that have changed over the last few years in the NFL and in fantasy football. I've got two of them that I actually gave Gretch in advance, and one that I just thought of. So let's just start with this. The tight end position. We used to joke about how every time we said tight end was deep, it turned back into a disaster. And now it just looks fantastic. There's arguably the greatest tight end class, rookie class in NFL history last year. And seemingly just wins across the board for Sam Laporta with the new offensive coordinator, Kyle Pitts with Kevin Stefanski, Isaiah Likely following Harbaugh to the New York Giants. I'm going to try to think of other tight ends that I can name while Ben continues. It's okay. The cough was gone until it wasn't.
I mean, I got over it, but I got something in my throat, and then I'm getting over a cough, and you're gonna have a little coughing fit.
Is this depth at tight end, you think, here to stay for the next 3 to 5 years, or is it a mirage again?
No, I think we're moving in a positive direction. I think it's fascinating, kind of how you think about it, because we saw that increase in multiple tight end formations in a lot of the different offenses. The Rams famously did a lot of 13 personnel, which gets to that. We were talking about how defenses are less regulated and they're doing all these things with the secondary. And then there was this whole conversation in season about how when they went to 13 personnel, the defenses were matching with base personnel and getting out of nickel and getting the DBs off the field, which makes it a lot harder for you to do the tricky things in the secondary. So you're regulating the defense again, and then you can attack them. You can either overpower them with the run with multiple blockers, or you can attack them in the passing game that way. The problem is the Rams didn't have any tight ends that were fantasy relevant when they're putting three
of them is good for fantasy.
Exactly. So you have this issue of, are routes going to consolidate enough in these offenses? Like AJ Barner is one that people are a little bit interested in as a later round guy because he had a little bit of an interesting year for Seattle, and he scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He had 2 catches in their other 2 playoff wins combined. I mean, this is a team that was doing the multi-tight end sets and had a rookie as their other main tight end, Elijah Arroyo, but they may use Elijah Arroyo more next year. The way I'm looking at AJ Barner is like, last year was probably kind of a spike year, and I don't know how the routes come up for him.
Right.
And so some of those types of guys, they're going to spike a little bit efficiency-wise, and they're going to be able to help in the pass game if we're doing more of this 12 and 13 personnel and regulating defenses and getting DBs off the field and then throwing against it. And so you could have the spike games. But I also think as far as depth at tight end for fantasy football, the truly elite ones can still really differentiate in that landscape. So you have a larger middle class, but if Trey McBride's going to go out there and run 600 routes and get as many targets as he does, he's going to be better than guys that are running 400 routes. It's such a massive difference in actual potential to make an impact with the route volume alone. And so this position, it's getting deeper. Yes, I do think you can play it late. I think when I was at CBS and when we had those conversations, I remember Azer started using that greater late thing. I felt that way at the time, and I remember kind of describing tight end, and when he was like, so you're saying kind of like a greater late thing, I was like, oh God, I'm going to use that. And I've basically described tight end that way ever since. And I think it's gone more that way. Yeah. You either want to get a really, really good tight end, an elite, a Trey McBride or a Brock Bowers, or one of the young guys, maybe Colston Loveland, maybe our guy Harold Fanning can get in there. I think the profile's interesting enough. Maybe Tyler Warren. And then pretty quickly you get to a place where you're like, these mid-round tight ends are not different than what I can get probably from from the waiver wire, from the very end of the draft, because now there's a deep middle group. So if you miss out on the stars, then you probably just want to wait late because there's not some huge value over replacement element in that next tier. And so I do think the depth's going to be there because a position schematically matters to what is happening in real football. But I also think there's going to be gaps between the great ones and the non-great ones.
We're going to just take a little detour and stay on tight ends for a second, because I'm really interested in the coordinators movement, or not just coordinator, play caller, Stefanski and Petzing specifically, and the impact that has on Laporta, Pitts, and McBride, because he's no longer in that offensive system that has button targets to tight ends. So many look like flares to a running back in the flat, and no, that's Trey McBride. And I don't really know that we have those same targets in Arizona this year. So do you think, is it more likely people are going to overestimate the impact of these coaching moves or underestimate? Tight end specifically.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. That's the kind of thing that the market, I feel like the market definitely over responds to certain things, but it's a little bit more like schizophrenic in the modern era where, we have like best ball and we have all these things, and certain things catch on and the market goes hard at it. And I'm like, I think
now it's like Trey McBride's a borderline round 1 pick, and Kyle Pitts and Sam Laporta are well behind the second year guys.
Yeah, and I mean the McBride thing is fascinating. I'm definitely into him, and especially if Brissett's going to be back. But I do think there's risk. That's expensive. And so I mean I don't know if people are going to over respond to it or under respond to it. I think it's a really important. I think it's a great question that you asked, and I don't think I have a great answer for it.
Well, it's something to watch in the next few months at least.
Exactly. Yep.
The other thing is, back when you and I used to podcast multiple times a week, like we were having races to see how many wide receivers we could have through round 6, or how long we could wait to draft a running back. The last few years, the running backs, especially at the top, have been much more reliable than the wide receivers. But one of my favorite things through the 15 years I've been doing this is watching the market respond to these shifts in running back and wide receiver value, and almost always watching it swing back.
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting a quick swing back to the wide receivers, or has something fundamentally changed?
I think the sport's fundamentally changed, because I think defenses have fundamentally changed how they approach stopping offenses. I think for most of the NFL's history, and the NFL's always gone through eras, I think for most of the NFL's history, defenses focused on stopping the run and then worried about the pass. And passing efficiency got better and better and better and better. And now I think defenses fundamentally are focused on stopping explosive passes and working back toward the line of scrimmage from like a foundational mindset of what they're trying to do. So I do think the response, like, I don't think we're going to get back to a world where you can just throw down field all the time, because like, unless they change the rules, which they've done in the past with different types of rule changes.
Right.
And so I do think right now running backs, I mean, again, you saw the Seahawks as a team that arguably ran too much relative to the like game situations they were in and those things. They weren't a particularly efficient rushing team. And you get back to like a very like early 2000s mindset of like, you just keep running and running and running. Even though passing is way more efficient per play, you run to set up the pass, and you run to set up, and you just have to stick with the run until they respect it. And then you can throw over the top and you'll be efficient. And so for years, people were like, well, teams need to pass more. The passes are way more efficient. It's not that simple right now, because defenses are like, we'll just let you run, basically. Or at least that's the way that I understand
Which is, I think, what we used to say defenses should do. Is just let
teams
run, and it's working. So
yeah,
it is very difficult as somebody who, as a dynasty fantasy football manager, to get past this idea that I want to build a team full of quarterbacks and pass catchers, and then I'll worry about the running backs the last minute. And then it turns out, wait, the running back might be the most important part to actually winning. And so I think we may see a little swing in people, even how they value wide receivers and running backs in dynasty.
Yeah. But the really big part of this that doesn't change, that I think is interesting, is that wide receivers still have more longevity in their career. Running backs can still be replaced within seasons. Like the dead zone research I used to do was about, like, I remember when I was at CBS, I was writing about Mike Davis to Atlanta, and everyone was projecting him for 250 plus touches. And it's like, Mike Davis has never been a 250 touch back, and he may get replaced. And he pretty much did right away. I think it was maybe rookie year, Tyler Algier or whatever it was. And And the point is, if you lose that role at running back, you have no value. So this element of whether that means we just take a bunch of running backs early and redraft or stock up on running backs in Dynasty does need to still consider the fact that, like, as we're talking about JCM, if they go and draft Jeremiah Love, his value shifts in a way that receivers' values don't shift that much when a team adds another receiver. It can't shift that much. It's different. Multiple receivers can be on the field at the same time. Having multiple good receivers in an offense doesn't mean that a good one can't still earn a lot of targets and those types of things. And so you still have the realities of what the positions are and how the value changes can be so drastic. And that also goes for cheap running backs suddenly becoming very valuable, which is part of the reason that we would often take a lot of receivers early in our drafts. Is you're also trying to get the late round running backs that can suddenly play like they're going to be a second rounder next year, which you have every year. You have breakout players. We're talking about Bhayshul, Tuten as a guy that's going to go way higher. I mean, Bucky Irving the year prior, and then last year he was a second rounder. I haven't looked enough at the early ADP this year, but I'm quite certain there are guys that were going much later last year that shoot all the way up there in value at running back in a way that doesn't quite happen as aggressively at receiver. So there's those factors still matter. And my response on how to play it is that it's balanced more.
Right.
Like, it's not a good answer, but there's not as much of like a clean, like, oh, I want to build through receiver. Like, you have to be smart with the micro changes in the market. And if you're in a draft that's going really receiver heavy, maybe that's a situation to be more running back heavy, and vice versa. If people are going to go very running back heavy, if the market overcorrects, like you were saying, you can still build through good receivers who will give you what good receivers have always given you: a little bit more stability, a little bit more floor. Even if they don't hit their ceiling, they're still going to run a lot of routes. They're still going to be somewhat productive. And then you could still potentially hit on later round running backs that take over those jobs, or there's injuries at that position. And you can still have a really high performing roster from that perspective. So the way that you play it in fantasy can be a little bit different than specifically where we're headed as a sport.
Point of clarification, because I remembered it being much more hilarious than rookie year Tyler Algier, and it was. The 2021 Atlanta Falcons were led in rushing by Cordero Patterson.
That's right. Cordero Patterson.
It wasn't the young, exciting rookie. It was Arthur Smith and Cordero Patterson. And then the final question that I'm going to add on.
30-year-old Cordero Patterson, if I'm not mistaken.
I think part of the thing between the game changing, that's also maybe reflected in the rushing yards for quarterbacks being down and receivers not being as good because the reception totals are down, is the kickoff rule. Mm-hmm. Is that we are seeing fewer yards and more scoring, and so touchdowns become more important relative to yards and catches than they have been in the past. And I don't even know if it's going to turn into a question. I just want to say it's extremely frustrating as somebody who tries to project fantasy football, because we all know that touchdowns are the least predictable thing about what we do.
Because then you get Devontae Adams, who like has 14 touchdowns as a goal line back, but had like one of his worst seasons as far as yardage. He had under 800 receiving yards, and it's like his yards per target were poor. Everything was really poor. He's been over 1,000 every year leading into last year, and he's down below 800, and he only catches 60 balls. He'd been 85 plus catches for 5 straight years prior to that, and yet he leads the league with 14 receiving TDs. And in a landscape that I completely agree with what you're saying. Right. We have on a macro level fewer yards per touchdown for offenses, and running backs consolidate a lot of the touchdowns. And in that landscape, it's harder to have the massive receiving yardage seasons. And we haven't had as many like 1,300 plus yard receivers the last couple of seasons as those kickoff rules have been implemented. And we've seen that shift in like the average drive length and all of that stuff. It's meaningfully changing the sport. Total yardage was down a ton last year. It was one of the lowest total yardage seasons in a lot of years.
Plays too. Plays are down also.
Plays are down, and yet points are up. And I think a big part of that is when you get the points off shorter drives early in games, you also accelerate to the point where you get to like the late game stages where teams stop trying and those things. And so you just don't have as much time to accumulate statistics in a football game. Just changes the sport. And I think you're completely right that benefits the running backs, but it also benefits, like you said, touchdowns are so hard to predict. If you can get a receiver who is a goal line receiver, catches 14 touchdown passes, he's going to be closer to the high end receivers, right? From that perspective.
good luck projecting the next guy. That's not
To do
Devontae
that.
Adams to be. Maybe it's Mike Evans in San Francisco.
That's what people were saying. Yeah,
Right.
I got asked that question.
I do want to try to get to a couple of questions from the chat. And so let's go back to Justin Jefferson because we maybe didn't give him enough. Is he a top 5 wide receiver this year with Kyler Murray?
Yes. Justin Jefferson is very, very good. And JJ McCarthy was the problem. That's my take.
All right. I just traded Michael Penix, Cam Scatterbo, and Drake London for Jackson Dart and Breece Hall. How'd I do? So I think Michael, this is another one of the situations, I guess, real quick. I kind of assume Tua is going to be the starter in Atlanta as long as he's healthy.
Interesting. I don't know. I was asking other people's opinion on that one. I don't have a strong opinion on it.
Okay. Might just be a legitimate battle. But looking at this, like, obviously it's super flex because why is anybody trading Michael Penix if it's not Cam Scatterbo? Could be a top 12 dynasty running back. Could be Jeremiah Love's backup. Drake London's elite.
Right.
I think you mitigated some risk here. I'm not sure I'm ready to call this a big win, but I think you received a lot more security.
Yeah, assuming Superflex, I like Dart's future prospects quite a bit more than Penix, and I like Breece's quite a lot more than Scatterbo, but London's a lot to give up to bridge those gaps. I probably would take the other side in a vacuum because of Drake London, and we were just talking about the wide receiver element, but I agree with you. I think at both the running back and quarterback spot, you mitigated risk and you did well for yourself. So, I mean, it's not a horrible trade or anything.
And I've got, I don't know how I feel about this. I do have Dart higher than London on my super flex trade chart. So I think you got the best piece in the deal. Also, let's see if we can get to 2 more. What are your thoughts? This is a good, these are the types of questions Ben Gretch likes. What are the thoughts on dynasty trades at this point in the offseason? Some great opportunities to buy low, but also an increased chance it goes very wrong before the season even starts.
Yeah. I mean, it is a great question. I guess my answer is that I want to be selective for the reasons that you said. I mean, I'm always like, when it comes to these types of questions, I'm always winding up in the gray area. And I'm like, I'm not on either side. You know, I know there are people that be like, yeah, you got to be sending out offers right now. You got to be doing it. And I do think if you know what you're going after and you've identified like real targets, and especially the people that play in a lot of dynasty leagues and have portfolioos, and they've identified like a specific target they're going to go make an offer in every league for, I get that. I think you can be very profitable doing that if you're really confident you've identified an undervalued asset. I think you probably want to be doing it in those sort of like tail situations, in like the ones that you're really confident are extreme sells and the market is missing, or really confident are extreme buys and the market is missing. Because a lot of the stuff in the middle, yeah, there are going to be some swings. You're probably going to be wrong that there's these minor, price differences. And yeah, it can go very wrong for sure. So
I saw somebody else in the chat that said this is a good time to be selling rookie picks and wait to sell your vets until we start playing football again. And I agree with that. I will say, as a contender, I have found this is a good time to get some really good discounts on veterans that people are worried about. Mm-hmm. And so, especially in a draft class where we're not that excited about round 2, I might be trying to see if I could turn some round 2 rookie picks into some older veterans that still have big upside, and just be like, well, if they do fall apart before the season starts, my second round pick was probably going to be terrible anyway. So I'm okay with that. So yeah, that's one type of swing that I like to take for contenders right about now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Last one. We got to get a Wandale question in. He's a Titan. I don't know if you know this, but Wandale's turned into a point of contention on the podcast because
I did know that.
Giants fan Adam always really dismisses Wandale Robinson as just not really being good at all. And
that's perfect.
And I've been I think the opportunity in Tennessee with the coach that just drew up 140 targets for him in back-to-back seasons, if he's cheap, but is this cheap? Would you trade Wandale and a 4th for the 2026 110? So I know you're not, neither one of us are fully ready for say who we're going to pick with the 110. But again, we'll keep in context. We're kind of viewing this as there's 5 good players. There's maybe 3 to 4 more, maybe good players. And then we're,
But even in classes And some of the biggest hits in classes that are deeper have still been late first rounders or second rounders. We don't always know.
No,
I really like Wandell. I completely agree with what you said. I look at the targets per out run stuff I mentioned. It was really strong in his prospect profile in college at different depths, which I like to see. He's able to earn downfield more than I think people realize. And then, the fact that he's earned 140 targets the last 2 years. There was only like 8 receivers in the NFL that were at like 135 plus last year.
Right.
It's not easy to do that. That is a massive amount. And people are just confident that he can't do anything beyond that. And then last year, he proved that he could. He made multiple plays down the field. We got the air yards with it. There was actual efficiency with it as far as like after the target, like yards per target type efficiency, because it was really low the prior years. And that's why people said, well, it doesn't matter if he gets 140 targets. He's not going to do anything. And now he goes to a team that I do think they have a lot of available targets. They had a couple day 3 rookies play a lot that weren't great. So anyway, I like Wandell. I still think we have a veteran changing teams that is probably limited upside type of veteran. You have to take the mystery box of the 110 and be like, I don't even know who I'm taking there. I know it's not a great class. Maybe that's more like the 204 in a different class or something. But those players, when they hit, are going to be worth a lot more than Wandell Robinson's, modest production.
And like we said, there's a lot of things that can happen during the NFL draft that cause us to be, Mike Washington might get taken in round 2, or Ty Simpson might get taken in round 1, or a surprise wide receiver goes early. And all of a sudden we've got a complete full round that everybody's excited about. You might get more for that 110 in just a couple of months.
That's right.
You're getting for it right now. So I definitely like the move, even though I also like Wandell. Ben Gretch, awesome stuff. Remind everybody one more time where they can find you.
Yeah, Stealing Signals newsletter at Substack. It's a premium newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. I do send free posts out as well. A lot of my early offseason work has been in front of the paywall, some behind the paywall. But yeah,
go check that out, guys. It's worth every penny. Thank you, Emma, not just for making everything work, but fantastic job in the chat. I did not see the results of the poll. I guess there was a poll in the chat today about whether you haven't seen me for a long time. So I was Grizzly Adams about 3 days ago. And so she put up a poll about the Heath Scruff versus Heath clean shaven. And 64%, Emma tells me, prefer scruffy Heath. Unfortunately, my wife has vetoed the vote, and that will not be passing. So
I'm pretty scruffy myself right now for what I usually am.
Looking good. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everybody who was active in the chat. Just a reminder, I am out next week, so we won't talk to you next Tuesday, but we will see you the following week.